Brian Graiser. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
That's right. Rhymes with laser.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for joining me. And I want to just sort of put some context here that I don't think you and I have ever met or hung out in any capacity. Is that correct?
No,
So,
our interactions have been limited to Facebook and me occasionally watching you play from a concert distance.
well, I'm sorry for both of those. You reached out. I posted something. I kind of every once in a while I get like frustrated about just people, and it's not rational. I don't actually believe that. Anyway, sometimes I just go fishing to see who it is I want to talk to and who wants to talk to me. And I take when people reach out to me, I don't take that lightly. So thank you for reaching out to me after that post. You mentioned you mentioned something about sort of geeking out on vibraphone history, which I'd love to do. And I watched one of your videos. You had it's like the 14 things to know about vibraphone before going to college or something.
Yeah, we just put that up.
Yeah, and that I don't know if you know, I'm really good friends with Todd Meehan, and
Hmm.
I don't know if you followed Todd's exploits over the last decade or so, but your video had me giggling in many respects, and so I appreciate that sense of humor a lot in percussion in general, not taking ourselves too seriously while still trying to teach something. But before we get into sort of vibraphone geeking out, can you tell me just a little bit, just so I know and anybody listening to this knows, like, just tell me a little bit about Baby Brian. Like, what got you into, where you from? Like, what got you into doing, percussion? And you eventually went to Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati. Is that correct?
I got my DMA at CCM
Okay.
in Cincinnati, my master's in Toronto, and my bachelor's in performance and composition at Georgia.
Okay. All right. Excellent.
So, well, and I didn't really take percussion, seriously enough to consider it as a career until like I was, a junior in high school.
Hmm.
I wanted to do musical things when I was younger, and my parents, let us do all the art camps and piano lessons and all that, and I just tended to gravitate towards musical stuff.
Hmm.
Um, and so one thing to know about me is that at around age 5, I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome
Oh,
and a
wow.
few other neurological things that sort of go hand in hand with that.
Hmm.
And just especially in middle school and high school, the my musical activity was actually really helpful, not just in the sense that like, it was a creative outlet, but
Hmm.
there's actually some research about percussion being a form of proprioceptive therapy. So anything that's impact driven, like karate or tennis or percussion.
Hmm.
And so
So
that
can
had
you say that
a
word? Proprioceptic is it's not septic.
proprioceptive.
It's proprioceptive. Okay. What is
Hmm.
that? What is? Just give me the dictionary definition of that, if you in
Oh,
your
I'm
best
not a
in your best words, in your own
I,
words.
I think basically it's that it's something that has to do with resistance, impact, and hitting
Okay.
something. I may be totally
I've never heard the word before,
mischaracterizing it,
so
but
it's
that's how it was described to me.
okay.
And it made sense because somebody with Tourette syndrome has physical or sorry motor or vocal tics
Right.
that are usually tied into the level of stress or whether you have enough sleep. And I would see in myself that whenever I was playing percussion, that stuff went away or at
Hmm.
least drastically reduced. And actually, I
How?
remember seeing a documentary um, on music in the brain. Shoot, I forget the guy's name now. I'll have to look it up. But he went around. He saw the effects of music on different people's conditions, and he visited this guy in upstate New York who was just a rock drummer. And the guy had really severe Tourette syndrome. He was, kind of moving all over the place anytime he was speaking.
Hmm.
And then as soon as he sat down at the kit and started playing, he just looked like a dude playing drums.
Hmm.
So there was something there, and it really was, it made me feel good.
Hmm.
And then, of course, being around other percussionists, being on the drum line, all that, there's this, social development aspect that helped me through, the dangers of puberty and all that
Well,
other
yeah. I mean,
social stuff.
I'm sorry to interrupt, and again, anything I ask, I'm asking out of ignorance, and so if I touch on anything too personal, just tell me, like, I'd
I'm
rather
an open
not.
book.
How did Tourette's manifest itself in you in particular? Because growing up, I didn't know anybody. Well, let me say this: I didn't know if I knew anybody with Tourette's. No one told me that they had Tourette's, but it's like saying, "Well, I didn't know anybody that was gay when I was growing up." It's like, well, maybe they just didn't tell you.
Right,
Like what I knew of Tourette's just because of the cartoonish sort of the caricatures of it that show up in the
right.
media or in cartoons or sitcoms or whatever. But how did it manifest with you particularly?
Well, so and I'm fortunate. I've I would characterize my cases, on the milder side. I remember going to like a Tourette's, conference for kids when I was in middle school and seeing some other kids who really had some severe cases of it.
Mm-hmm.
The first iteration I think was like when I was first diagnosed, and it was just I was clearing my throat a lot to the point where I started getting a lot of throat infections. And then it's sort of I've gone through phases. I'm sure I'll I'm forgetting some of them. I remember at one point there was a period of time for several months where I'd like jerk my arm like that. And then the strongest one was again around when I hit puberty was there'd be this sort of like hooting sound that I would make by inhaling really sharply. And that was the one I think that had a big impact on just my social development and my awareness of Tourette syndrome, and then therefore my awareness of how percussion helped me with that, because this was a sound I was making that you would hear across a hallway, across a band room for sure.
Well, and did you feel like you mentioned the sort of, and again, like I don't want to open any can of worms here, but like, did you feel like as you were growing? I mean, were you bullied for this sort of thing?
Oh yeah.
Was it like, yeah? I mean, I was bullied too, but for different reasons. But like for things that you're often bullied for things you can't control. But like you did say that you found there was like a little bit of a home in the percussion world in terms of like how you felt, and I'm curious, like, was part of your gravitation towards percussion both like, yes, it helped you physically, like in terms of the Tourette's, but also socially? Like, how much of that was tied into what you were feeling?
Oh, like 100% both. And I remember as a high school freshman, I was learning a lick for our marching band show, and then our section leader, the senior there, checked in on me in the back room and saw that I was basically done learning it, and he was he was showering me with praise and telling other people how quick I learned it. And I remember thinking, like, this is sort of the first time in school that like somebody's making a value judgment on me based on something I did rather than some component of my DNA.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it's like we all have those at some point in our life. Like somebody affirms you, and
Yeah.
I'm just saying this as an educator too. It's something that I forget how much. And you're a teacher now too. Like, it's like I forget how much power I have in those moments, no matter how old they are, whether it's a 23-year-old grad student or it's a fifth grader. Like, trying to figure out who needs the compliment when, so that they can get through the next day. Like,
Right.
because you don't know like
exactly
what bullshit they're dealing with, outside of school, and just somebody saying to you in that moment, like. Anyway, I'm just saying for educators now, like, don't underestimate how powerful that just those little moments of acknowledgement are.
Absolutely.
But like, so as you progressed, who made you decide you wanted to do percussion as a job or as like a living? Like, because that and when I was in high school, I always felt I looked around, I was just like, I can't believe you do this for a living. You're just like you're a cartoon of a person. Like, who does this? Like, how did who sort of flipped that switch for you?
Well, I think I have to give credit to my high school percussion instructor. That's Paula Williams, now Dr. Paula Williams. And she, it was, I would say that, it wasn't necessarily that she was encouraging everybody to go be professionals. It was just that she came in and was, sort of opened our eyes to all the different ways that you could be a professional musician. And so she allowed us to like pursue compositional projects in high school, and I was able to go up and like write something and play my own piece in a little recital, and that was huge to me. And then just also, she was the one who introduced me to really playing the vibraphone, and that was sort of what when I started. The first time I played a not even a solo, but just like a significant part in percussion ensemble for the vibraphone, I said, this is the best thing that I've done so far. I really gravitated towards it.
Well, this is. I'm glad you mentioned the vibraphone thing, because I was sitting here thinking, just as a podcaster, like, how do I segue into the vibraphone? but I'm like, of course, like, it's not rocket science that vibraphone is something that you're psyched about right now, because as a young person, it imprinted on you in some way that like that this is tied together with your Tourette's. It's tied together with the compliment that you got. Like, all of a sudden, now you have a success on one instrument that has a voice to you, and all of a sudden now your voice is. You have a different voice, one that you don't have to clear its throat every time. You can just press a pedal,
right.
like,
right.
or, And for me, that was like the steel drum. Like that, when I was in high school, I just was looking around. I was like, why is anybody doing anything else other than this? This is crazy. Like, what's wrong with you people?
That's
You know?
exactly how I felt.
Yeah, and I like, and the primacy effect of that is something I just can't get out of my DNA. Like, no matter what, I'm 42, and I'm still like, I walk into Carnegie Hall with So Percussion, and I look around, I'm just like, why are we playing anything but Pan right now? Like, you guys are crazy. But so you started getting into vibraphone. Can you tell me a little bit, like, why? I mean, I gathered a little bit from your videos, like you clear. There's something about the vibraphone and its flexibility and it's the spectrum of its potentiality is much wider than I think people think about or give it credit for, because most percussion instruments are fairly limited, like the marimba, the snare drum, the glockenspiel. Like, there's everything comes with a bag of limitations that you have to tease through, you know. But
Right.
for you, what was it about the vibraphone that got you like geeked out?
I mean, the very, very first thing when I was younger was that just I liked the sound of it better. You know, I liked that it, you know, I could have longer notes. I liked that it was this sort of pure, you know, I don't know. There's something about metals that I always just gravitate towards. And then as I got more into playing it at a more advanced level, I you know, discovered that there's actually a lot more that you can do with this. You have many more options and many more responsibilities, therefore, because simply just letting all the notes ring is not an option. And I found that, you know, especially as a composer, the more that I started writing and you know, the more creative ideas I started coming up with, the more I realized, well, if I put it on, you know, any other instrument besides vibraphone, I feel like I have to sort of put limits on what I'm writing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I mean, I remember when I was studying vibraphone in school, and when I say studying it, like I had a semester where I had to work through the Dave Friedman.
That's right. The Friedman
Book.
dampening and pedaling.
Yeah, and I remember having a similar feeling that I had to playing or learning timpani, and that I feel like I would have had if I had to learn tabla. Like there, the barrier to sound really good is like there's an exponential curve that you have to get past before, like timpani, for example. Like, yes, you can make an okay sound pretty quickly, but can you do it in tune? Maybe you can. Maybe your ears are really good, you can tune it up, but timpani are kind of hard to make a great consistent sound. Like, there's a skill set there. I was just like, why am I in ninth grade studying timpani right now? It's like, that guy should be doing something else. Vibraphone, there, like, as soon as I got into that book, I was just like, what the fuck? Like, there's like a million, and then you listen to Gary Burton, you're like, why would I? It's like, be like, okay, we're gonna study tabla. Let's listen to, you know, Sandeep Burman and, you know, Ala Raka from, you know, Silk Road or whatever, like, or Ravi Shankar, like, you know. So like, but for you, that was something that was attractive. Like, there was this sort of endless, sort of open source potentiality there.
Yeah, there's you know, as a, you know, I say as a composer, but as a performer too, I feel like, you know, pieces that somebody else has written, you know, I can add more as an interpreter because I know this instrument better than most composers. And so therefore, you know, it's like listening to, you know, three different people, you know, record Bach. You know, you want to listen to three different people because they can do different things with voicings and phrasing. And, you know, I feel like if you get two vibraphone players who really know what they're doing, then you get the same thing. You get two people who can use the pedaling and dampening and all these other effects to create totally different realizations of the same piece. And that's why we keep playing things hundreds of years later.
What do you feel? I mean, is there anything? I got the hint from your video. Again, like, I've only scratched the surface on your oeuvre, so forgive me for my ignorance here. But like, what are some pedagogical things? If you could just go into every school right now and be like, and just take one thing out and put another thing in, that would change the way people studied vibraphone. Let's maybe keep it specific to that. Like, what are some big pet peeves you have about the way percussionists or composers, quite frankly, approach the vibraphone?
Well, if you saw the video, then I'm sorry that I'm going to repeat my stuff a little bit. Number one biggest thing is that a lot of performers and composers, especially composers who are percussionists who happen to also be composers, they will basically write or play music for the vibraphone that's really for the marimba. And, you know, occasionally, you know, you put the pedal down, you have some whole notes or half notes, but otherwise, you know, it's just a lot of licky marimba stuff. And there's nothing taking advantage of what the instrument can do. And look, like, if, you know, if you're a composer listening to this, write what you want to write. And if it's basically just like a licky marimba piece, but you just need a metallic timbre, then do it.
Right.
But pedagogically, you could basically put that same piece on like flute, and there's no difference. It's just a whole sequence of notes with nothing else going for it. So
Right.
I think learning how to do the more interesting things on the instrument is going to is it's just going to benefit everybody. I remember when Mark Applebaum came to visit CCM for a short thing, and I played his vibraphone solo in the concert, and I asked him, hey, I've got this like custom Demaro instrument, and it has this special thing with the motor that's going on. I know that you said that you don't want motor on or whatever, but I think if I do this, it'll sound good, and I can also do dampening here to do this. And he just looked at me and said, look, like whatever you can do to make me sound better, go for it. So we should be able to do that for anybody.
Well, some of that is the responsibility of the percussionist to teach composers about. I mean, because composers don't wake up with this instinctual knowledge of vibraphone pedaling, or the idea that a half pedal is a thing, or motor speed, or whatever. Like, and that's something that for me that I've learned a ton about, just like in making mistakes of composers writing for steel drums in particular, being like, do this or don't do that, and then I realized like, oh, I've just told them all the things that I'm really good at, but is that always the most helpful thing for the steel pan or for them as composers, but it's I mean, the vibraphone is kind of like it's like a Lamborghini that often is never taken out of first gear.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah,
like I think, and I'll say that for myself too, like. And this is something I'm going to cop to, just because I want to ask you one question that I feel like destroys the I don't want to say the legitimacy, but the street cachet of the vibraphone in many people's eyes, including myself.
I think I know what you're going to ask.
It is that the motors never work.
Oh, that's not what I thought you were going to ask.
And as someone who backlines marimbas a lot when we go places, I can never tell a composer to write. Steve Mackey for It Is Time wrote a specific metronome marking speed on the vibraphone for this one spot that lines up with something somebody else is doing. It happened on the record. Our motors are broken. Every motor we backline is broken. And so the first thing out of my mouth to every composer these days, when they're like, oh, you want to write for motor? Is like, well, you can, but it's never going to work. And immediately it's just like the wall comes down, And I'm saying that, I'm copping to my own sort of bullshit here, but how much should we be talking to vibraphone manufacturers right now to be like, listen, we got to make a vibraphone with 2 moving parts and something that can't be taken apart by a 5th grader?
Right. Well, I mean,
if we're going to talk about this in any sort of long-term sustainability, like, if the Lamborghini you're driving is constantly having the wheels stolen off of it at night,
right,
then it's not a Lamborghini anymore. It's a Honda Civic without wheel. I mean, it's just the same, So like,
right. Well, I'm spoiled. I've got my Demaro vibraphone back here, so I have not had problems with the motor. But to be fair, I've only had it for 14 years. So I mean, it's sort of the repair and maintenance thing, right? If you have a busted gauge on your timpani, or if you have a bent resonator on your marimba, you go out and you deal with it. I think that one of the reasons why we consider the motor to be like once it's done, then let's just not worry about it and let's just keep playing the instrument, is because it's not often required. And so especially manufacturers, and it's a good thing that they do this, but they offer models without a motor, save you $1,000, $1,200. Right. And so because it's not always essential, I'd say it's not usually essential. What you have are people who just get used to the idea that it's always optional.
Yeah.
So I guess it really just depends on how important it is to you, right? I mean, you could buy a new one. You could get electrician to come in and take a look at it. Honestly, if my motor dies, I'm gonna just I'm gonna call Doug Demaro up or an electrician up and say, hey, I don't know how to fix it, but please tell me what what do I need to pay you to do it?
As somebody who's like, I have a close relationship with Kyle Dunleavy, who's a steel drum builder and tuner. It's like, so if JetBlue throws my pans and they go out of tune, I can just call Kyle. Most people don't have that that luxury of just picking up the phone, calling Doug tomorrow, and being like, "Hey, this thing doesn't work." Like, I
Right.
feel like you need to start like some sort of like, like I don't know, is it like Best Buy that has the Geek Squad or whatever that just
Yeah,
drives
yeah,
around
yeah,
and fixes?
yeah.
You just drive around and fix vibraphones. Like, I feel like that might do us. Well, I'm curious. What was the thing you thought I was going to say about the
I thought you were gonna
vibes?
talk about the range,
Oh,
and I have this whole like response ready
no.
to go.
Well, okay. Let me talk about the range for a second. I actually love that limitation of just F to F, and I kind of hate the extended range vibraphones.
Oh no.
So, podcast over.
The
Well,
extended
and I
range vibraphone is like my specific interest.
well, that's great. And I have when I say that again, I have an extended range set of double seconds that are, you know, what I've and maybe Demaro's figured this out. I've always noticed like as soon as you go one note lower than that F natural, all of a sudden the sound quality starts to get a bit low. It's like, oh, maybe there's a reason that F was the lowest they always went, because as soon as you tune metal bars that are that big, you get these weird harmonic. So anyway, I'm talking out of my ass a little bit here, but like what?
Well, you're not entirely. Am I allowed to rag on specific brands, or should I keep them anonymous?
As long as you accept full responsibility for anything that comes your way.
Okay, well
'Cause
then
I'm not going to rag on brands, but I will say things that you
Okay.
do you. That's all I
All right.
ask
Well,
of any
so
guest.
I'll keep this as observational as possible. No judgment.
Quantitative, not
Right,
qualitative.
that's right, quantitative. So, for instance, in 2006, I went to PASIC, and I was that was when I was looking, or maybe it was 2008. But I was looking at buying a 4-octave vibraphone. I committed to making that my interest. And Steve Weiss's booth had a 4-octave Yamaha vibraphone on the floor as a demo. And I was going to buy it. I called my parents one night. I said, "Okay, let's line up the money. Let's buy it." And then the next day, I wanted to bring my professor, who was Tony McCutcheon at the time, to go listen to it. And they actually had it in a quiet room. And so I listened to it, and that's what convinced me not to buy it. And so you mentioned the overtones on the bottom end. What I saw on the Yamaha is that after the low F, the bars don't get any wider. So what happens is, the E under the F is close enough that it kind of sounds normal, but then because the width of the bar doesn't get adjusted, what you get is less and less of the fundamental and more of the overtones. I can accept that, for somebody who's like gigging around and who wants portability, that if that's your thing, like especially if you're doing like a bunch of jazz gigs, you got to fit that in the back of a car or something. That's necessary, and I totally get it. This tomorrow, I said it's 400 pounds. It takes me 50 minutes to break it down and put it in the car.
Yeah.
So like there's a trade-off.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's all right. So the the history of the 4-octave vibraphone is one of those things that I was hoping to geek out about here.
Yeah, please.
But before I do, I will say to anybody listening, there is a lot of flack that I hear about the vibraphone, even just the 3-octave one being so much smaller than the marimba, and therefore that's why people aren't as interested in it. And I would say that all you have to do is look at all the other instruments, the non-percussion instruments, and see how many of them have ranges of 3 octaves or less. The Bach cello suites are written for less than 3 octaves. The violin partitas and sonatas less than 3 octaves. People have figured out how to write for smaller than a 5-octave marimba. So I would say that.
Well, I think also too, like, I think there's something to be said for, again, like limitations to some degree. Like I'm curious for you to give me some context on why the range is F to F, and I can tell you basically why double second steel drums are 9 times out of 10 E to A or E to B flat or something. There's a history there, but most of that came from necessity and resources and just sort of the way people built things over time. But why is the vibraphone only that range?
Because of World War II.
No shit, really? I love World War II. I don't love World War II. I love the history and the context around it. Like what?
So it turns out, when the vibraphone was first invented, it was very much an oddity. It was a novelty, and there wasn't really this idea where, as the moment it was invented, everybody knew that it was, this range. That was not at all the case. And
Mm-hmm.
in the first like 5 or 10 years of its existence, there was a lot of experimentation. Well, let's make a 2.5 octave. Let's make a 3.5 octave.
Mm-hmm.
So uh, uh, based on everything that I've been able to research, in 1930, 39,
Mm-hmm.
Boozy and Hawkes had the Ajax line of instruments, and they advertised a 4 octave C to C vibraphone in 39. But we don't know if any of them were actually sold, and they shut down their whole operation because of World War II,
Mm-hmm. Because
and never resumed.
All of that aluminum needed to be used for bullets and tanks and
Exactly.
things like that.
But the other thing to look at are the earliest pieces written for vibraphone.
Mm-hmm.
So, like what we generally consider Lulu, to be the first piece, the Alban Berg opera, to be the first concert piece that had the vibraphone in it. And that was sort of the subject of my doctoral research, was that part in the Lulu opera, and also the 5 movement symphonic suite is written for a 4 octave instrument. And that was in 1935.
4 octave. So right now the instrument is F to F.
Yeah, that's 3 octaves, F to
But
F.
the original range was the
C
higher
to C.
C or lower C, the C
Both.
below.
Yes, C to C.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah. And that part now, in editions that I've seen, it's an ossia, but it goes low and it goes high. It's the full 4 octave range. And that was in 35. So I had this whole theory where, Boozy and Hawkes was in London, and the BBC Symphony, they were the ones who recorded and broadcast this Lulu suite. So maybe they got a custom instrument. And then I found out that Darius Milhaud also wrote a piece in 1932. It was incidental music to a play by Paul Claudel, Le Nonce Fête de Marie, and that part goes down to a low C. And then I found out that in 1929, Havergal Brian, he's this English composer. He's famous because he wrote the longest symphony. He's written like 100 symphonies. He wrote an opera, the Tigers, which has only ever been performed once in the 80s because the score was lost and then recovered. Mm-hmm. It has a part for 2 vibraphones, and one of them goes down to a low C.
Whoa. And the other one is for what range?
Sorry,
the other vibraphone part is for what?
Oh, so what he basically did was he has like a treble and a bass. So honestly,
got it.
Somebody today could just look at it and play it as if it was our grand staff. But back then they weren't thinking about that.
Right. Well, and so at the time though, this was Ajax was the company that was supplying or building these instruments, or?
Well, that's what I don't know, because we know Ajax had one in their catalog in 1939, but I don't know where the one would have been that he was writing for in 1929.
And when did, and again, pardon my ignorance here, when did Deegan come onto the scene?
So Deegan, so Leedy invented theirs in 1921.
Leedy, yes.
And then Deegan came out with their Model 145 in 1927, and that was the first vibraphone that had aluminum bars and a pedal. Before that, there were no vibraphones with pedals, so like everything was just ringing.
Huh? Why did they put the pedal on? Was there
to give them more control, to be able to do the dampening?
But there was no composer that was like, can you dampen this? Like who was why did that idea even come up?
Probably feedback from the performers, right? Because this was 1927; they came up with it, so there were no compositions for vibraphone at that point. It would all have been feedback from vaudeville or jazz players
who were tired of throwing their waistcoats on the instrument at the end of every piece to get them to stop ringing.
Fair enough, yeah. But there were some really funky early experiments. The earliest vibraphones had steel bars instead of aluminum, so they sounded really like junky and a lot of overtones. That first recording, the Senior Frisco recording, is on a steel bar one, the Leedy, and that apparent legend has it that hearing the sound of that vibraphone is what made the Deegan people want to make theirs but better. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're talking about busted motors. One of the really cool early things that was done, especially in the British models, the Premier and the Boozy and Hawkes models, was they had wind-up clockwork motors rather than electric ones.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, that it seems crazy to say those like a wind-up clock motor now, but like at the time, that's how things ran on their own without
That's right.
electricity. I mean, like it's not like, yeah, we can just plug things in now and it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like like there wasn't just outlets everywhere.
That's right. Well, hey, if
You know,
John Luther
like
Adams writes a piece for a vibraphone in a forest, if you had a clockwork motor, you could do it with the motor.
right. Well, that actually, I'm trying to think if that would be more than one. More than two moving parts, or whether like should we go back to the clock ticking motor, like rather than the
Sometimes I kind of wonder.
like just wind it up and well, yeah, okay, so let me this so, all right, so World War II happens though.
Hmm.
What happens to the vibraphone? I mean, what happens to the people who are working on the vibraphone at this point? Are they just
So,
like, well, I guess I got to go to Germany now, like I'm going
well,
off to
so
the
like the
war?
production of all this stuff, especially in Europe, of course, but everywhere, it basically either halts or kills the company.
Hmm.
And so after World War II, the surviving companies are sort of, they've circled the wagons. They're not trying to make big splashes. They're just trying to put something out there that'll keep them in business. And so what we
Right.
sort of end up with are these 3-octave models, and some of them are C to C, and some of them are F to F, and then uh, the F to F just eventually sort of wins out.
And it just a preference thing, like over time, like the bars just over. I mean, it's like when you like timpani, for example, like there's just notes that sound good on the low drum. As soon as you get out of the range, it starts. Yeah, let's put it on a different drum. And at some point, I imagine people on the vibraphone were just sort of like, oh well, this is kind of the range that just to my ears sounds the best, sounds the cleanest, sounds the most consistent from bottom to top. As soon as you start going too high, it gets a little like thin and wispy. As soon as you go down too low, you start hearing all these weird harmonics. Like, I mean, am I misdiagnosing that process?
No, and I think this is a theory. Like, I don't actually
Yeah, yeah.
have any papers to back it up, but I think that honestly, the biggest driving force in that was just capitalism. What
Hmm.
models were selling, and I think that had to do with a lot of the jazz players saying, hey, when I play with my group, this range sounds better than this range. I don't need to go way up to C7. I it's better for me to have the little lower half octave down here.
Right. Well, when did one of the things that struck me talking with John Beck Sr. This was maybe 2 years ago. We did a podcast and he was talking about the development of the college curriculum in the United States and like was it NARD, the National Association of Rudimental Drummers, and like again post World War II, a lot of the folks coming back had specific military drumming, playing in military bands, Navy bands, all those things. It didn't. It made sense that then in the college scene, the first things that teachers and students were learning was this rudimental stuff, and that really blossomed into other stuff. When did the vibraphone get injected into the college education curriculum? Because now, I mean, now it's like in the way that I'm trying to get the steel drum to be seen as an instrument that everyone just by default must study because of all of the important reasons. Like the vibraphone for now, at least 20 years ago when I went to school, is just like, well, someone decided this is what everybody needs to do now. Like, but that didn't start that way. At first, it was like the saxophone, where everybody's like, "That's a weird fucking instrument." Like,
Right.
you know.
Well. So when and the earliest like college percussion studios as we think of them today were started in the 50s.
Hmm.
Because before that you just be like an orchestral trainee. Um, my guess is that I'm actually going to think I'm going to make a bold claim here, and I can't back
Hmm.
it really up a whole lot, but I think that the vibraphone has sort of been in and around the college percussion studio basically as long as that idea has existed. And I think that's the case because I know that in the 1954, Michael Colgrass wrote a piece which is now unpublished, and I can't find anywhere, called "Chant for Vibes and Chorus."
Hmm.
And so the 50s, that would have been when he was
Yeah.
studying with Paul Price.
Right. Right.
So my guess is, they had one around and therefore he wrote for it. Now it could be that they had one around because they had a jazz program and maybe that's
Right.
what was there. But I think it's one of these things where, it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing. They
Yeah.
happen to have a vibraphone around. So those people started writing for it and using it. And because people were writing for it and using it, more schools decided that they needed it.
Yeah, well, in the sort of development of, and I'm sort of asking questions out loud here too, like, and that I don't, I'm not even asking you. It's sort of like did the vibraphone develop in Europe as quickly as it did in the United States because the United States invented jazz, and jazz, like, or in vaudeville, like, when I say invented, like, sorry, that's a broad brush, like, but jazz emanated from the United States, and the vibraphone was sort of, in vaudeville, the vibraphone was woven into that tapestry in a way that I guess I don't know if it was, although you mentioned Lulu, so Berg clearly was up on that stuff. Like, I'm not even asking you a question there. I'm just sort of being like, why the vibraphone? How did it become part of our daily diet, really, as students?
Well, those first three composers I mentioned, Berg and Mio and Havre O'Brien, they're all from Europe.
Yeah, I know. That's why as soon as I asked the question, I was like, of course you dummy. Like,
well, and then the next person to write something, I think, was Messiaen. He was like one of the only people to write for vibraphone during World War II. So I think what it is that it certainly like took hold of the jazz scene here, and it's, you know, you'll find plenty of jazz vibraphone players in Europe now, of course, but I think that it caught on with the classical contemporary composers in Europe quicker than it did here. So like in the 60s, there was this whole bunch of music that was being written for the contemporary vibraphone, and most of it was coming from Europe. Yeah. It wasn't really until like the 70s that sort of really took off here as well.
Well, in terms of American voices, that there's one composer, Stuart Saunders Smith, who, because I studied at the University of Akron, and his archives are there, and Larry Snyder at Akron is really good friends with Cliff Alexis as well, but with Stuart. And so I just sort of grew up with hearing the Lynx vibraphone series sort of in the zeitgeist around Akron all the time.
Right.
And I played the first one, I think, when I was in school. But in talking with Stuart, like, he really obsessed about the vibraphone and the glockenspiel too, like metal instruments that seem to not have like a real home. Like there's the marimba, for one reason or another, I think maybe because the big marimba bands, like, and all the marimba soloists out, think there's an ecosystem for it. The vibraphone always felt like the weird drunk uncle at the party that, like, you're like, cool, I know that you could do vibrato, Uncle Steve, but like, whatever, you know. But people like Stuart have and Christopher Dean, R.I.P. You know, like Morning Dove Sonnet was a piece as a kid in school, being like, okay, now that is a vibraphone solo I can get down with. Like, other than those two and Dave Friedman, obviously, like, who are some American composers that you feel would be good for students to check? Maybe I don't even need to limit it to American, but like, who are some composers now that you feel have really done stuff with the vibraphone that nobody else has done or is currently doing?
I do want to get back to Stuart because he and I have a good relationship. Gita Steiner is somebody that people ought to know, and the Vibraphone Project, my nonprofit, we gave out our inaugural Legacy Awards last summer, and she was one of the 3 awardees, nice. Posthumously, unfortunately. But Gita Steiner was actually a classmate of David Friedman, and then, you know, he actually played her first set of 3 pieces for vibraphone in recital as a student. Wow. And then she went on and she wrote something like a dozen pieces for vibraphone, significantly, you know, several solos and some chamber stuff as well. And I think that her solos, you know, the 4 bagatelles and the sonata, they had a lot of play, you know, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and then they sort of faded a little bit because, you know, she's no longer with us, so she's, you know, not keeping her marketing up to date. But they're fantastic contemporary pieces, and a lot of them, you know, because they have multi movements, they're all fairly short, and, you know, you could give, you know, a sophomore or a junior in college one movement to do as a project, and it's phenomenal. Yeah, you mentioned Stuart. You mentioned Chris Dean, who, you know, Chris Dean is sort of like the Varese of the vibraphone to me. You know, he didn't write a lot of pieces, but the ones he did basically like reinvented the whole thing.
What other than Morning Dove Sonnet? I mean, again, like, I used him as the like composer for vibraphone example. I'm just like, well, I actually only know one. So what the fuck am I talking about? Like, what else has he written for vibraphone?
So he had the apocryphal Still Life. That's another one that he wrote.
I've heard of that one.
And that's got some really cool techniques. You prepare the vibraphone a little bit, and you use, you know, some like mandolin rolls and some one-handed harmonics. He wrote this piece that he premiered at PASIC like I guess 15 something years ago, disquietude, and you have to use these like paint stirring sticks that you like glue on a piece of rubber, and then you do these other extended techniques with.
Mm-hmm.
There's this one piece that he wrote it's not a solo, it's a trio for vibraphone and two marimbas, called The Topography of Dreaming, and everybody has a bow and mallets, and it's just one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard.
Wow.
So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
and as far as I know, that's pretty much it. Other than the larger percussion ensemble
Mm-hmm.
stuff, but
Mm-hmm.
that they're textbooks on extended techniques.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was influenced by George Crumb,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
that Crumb never wrote a vibraphone solo, but look up his madrigals and all that to see his approach.
Mm-hmm.
Other vibraphone composers right now. I mean, it really just depends on what you're into. That's one of the really cool things about it, is that it's sort of getting a lot of interest from composers from all across the spectrum. I know a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people are really into Sarah Henney's,
Mm-hmm.
and Sarah's got some phenomenal stuff. Um,
There's a piece by Alyssa Weinberg called Table Talk. That's a duo
mm-hmm,
that is prepared, like you prepare the vibraphone and all these, with tin cans and all this different stuff. Elliot
mm-hmm.
Cole has these pieces called the postludes
The postludes, yes,
that are really, really interesting because you're only required to bow.
that's right.
You don't
And
actually
use
use your fingers, but you don't
right.
actually hit the instrument. And it's like what you mentioned early on, that like the sound quality of the vibraphone is very much like a sine tone, like a
Mm-hmm.
very clean, clear. And yeah, it's wild, like hearing a bowed vibraphone like that. After a while, like every time we do those pieces, like you can only do like two or three in a row before you start to be like, what? Like your ears
Yeah.
just get like flattened down by like straight sine waves. But it's like, but that's an interesting that's interesting to me that
Yeah.
like he's using the vibraphone in that specific way. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we touched on Stuart a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit
Mm-hmm.
about your relationship with Stuart?
So this is a great transition, because when you're talking about the pure sine tones, because he's said before that the pureness of it, or Sylvia, his wife, would say the thinness of the tone, but the pureness of it, basically makes it to his mind, blank paper, that he
Mm-hmm.
considers the vibraphone to be his medium for his musical diary,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just a blank canvas, and it's going to take whatever you take, without influencing your writing based on the complexity of its timbre.
Right, right.
Yeah, so in 2015, so I guess I have to back up a bit. So I double majored as an undergrad in composition and performance, and then I wanted to do that when I went to Toronto, but at that time, graduate students weren't allowed to double major, at least masters weren't, and now they are, and I'm still a little bitter about that. But I was able to take some composition classes with Christos Hatsis there, and Torque
Mm-hmm.
did a residency in that class, and that was great. And then I also found out that Michael Colgrass was living in Toronto, so I got to study privately with him for about a year.
Awesome.
And then when I was a doctoral student, composition was my cognate, but I still, I wanted to grow a bit more. So I found out about the Stuart Saunders Smith Summer Intensive, where basically, you just go up and you stay at a bed and breakfast in his town, and then you go spend a week with him. And that's what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we stayed in contact, and he's, a few years ago, I invited him to come down to Sam Houston State University, where I teach, and he did basically a week-long residency, although it wasn't an official residency. He just was kind enough to come down, and we were able to cover his flight.
Mm-hmm.
I just this past October was able to premiere a piece that I commissioned him to write for me, for vibraphone with some spoken text.
Awesome.
And yeah, and he's just a wonderful, great guy.
I mean, was he the one that wrote like an evening length vibraphone solo that's like an hour and a half long or something?
Yes, I think he's written a few things like that.
Yeah.
And right now he set out to write a collection of etudes
Mm-hmm.
that he intended to be like pedagogical etudes, and it's turned into this huge book of like performance etudes.
Yeah, yeah. I worked with Stuart a bunch when I was at Yale. Obviously, at University of Akron too. Stuart wrote a double set. I premiered a lead pan solo of his that had never been played, and then I commissioned him for a double second and tenor voice, male tenor voice duet. That's really gorgeous. And at that time, he was telling me about this vibraphone solo he was writing for. I don't remember, it was premiered in Europe somewhere, Italy, I think.
Bert Turner, would he have been the guy that was doing it?
I don't remember quite frankly. But just like those big sort of Stewart, I love because of the big like just shooting for the moon. Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna whether it be his solo percussion works like and some and Points North. Like there's a swinging for the fences is what I really respect about Stewart and
Yeah.
his compositional approach. And just in the interest of time, I kind of want to just put out one final thing to you, like because I've looked at the way the pedagogical tools for me personally as a student that resonated the most with me now in hindsight, that I wish I would, like if I could go back and go to school again, I wouldn't play any major rep pieces if I could avoid it.
Mm.
I wouldn't play Merlin, I wouldn't play Mirage or Two Mexican Dances.
Yeah.
I would go back and every week learn one of the Image solos, the Bar
Ah.
Courtier,
Uh-huh.
or I would go back every week and learn one of the Jihei Jung and Eric Chapich just put out a book of marimba solos that are Korean folk songs, like children's
Oh,
songs,
okay.
like 2-pager. You could learn them in an hour
Mm-hmm.
and play them on a studio class. Some of them are sight readable,
Ah.
and I now like I feel like I learned, and this is something Bob Van Cise was on me a lot. Like when I learned timpani with him, I played out of the Hochreiner 1 book, the first 20 etudes for the entire first year at Yale.
Mm.
Boom, yip, boom, yip,
Yeah.
boom, yip. Like that was my vibe. Yeah, and I was like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, but I learned a lot more about myself and my timpani playing
Mm-hmm.
by doing that. Same with the Image or these Korean folk songs. Like I learned Merlin really well. I didn't actually learn about myself, and so like I'm kind of curious. I feel like the Dave Friedman book is good in some respects, but what I love about the Image and these Korean folk songs is that they're satisfying songs that actually are there's a piece. It's a piece.
Mm-hmm.
What is that for the vibraphone? Where like you have where the barrier to access, no matter what, like, or a book that could be good for a doctoral student or a fifth grader.
Mm.
Like, I know that's kind of the needle to, pushing a camel through the eye of a needle sort of vibe, but like,
Yeah.
what is that and why and who's going to do it?
Well, so my dissatisfaction with what's available is one of the reasons why I'm actually kind of slowly working on a set myself. I've written
Great.
like 2 or 3 so far, and I think one of them's already available. It was one that I wrote for Rhythm Scene back through the composition committee for PAS. Honestly, I think the best thing that somebody can do is to like just forget about the percussion music and go like learn some bona, or just find a short little piece that's written for like violin or flute or something like that, and play it on the vibraphone with while making the priority of controlling every attack and every release and
Mm,
every bit of phrasing and every bit of nuance, and just like don't just let anything be what it's going to be because you didn't make a decision. You have to
mm,
decide everything, and that's going to teach you so much about the instrument. One of the biggest things that even as a professional, so my wife is a harpist, and we have a duo, Reflect Harp Percussion, and we do contemporary stuff and transcription stuff. And one of the things that we did in our first tour that ended up actually teaching me something new about the vibraphone was we did a Saint-Saëns piece for violin and harp, and
mm,
I just played the violin part on vibraphone. And there's no chords or anything; it's just a single melodic thing, and it reminded me how much you can do with that instrument. So just find something like that and just learn how to play it well, and don't take any part of the performance for granted.
well, I would also recommend that students like you know check out your video first of all of all your approach to the vibraphone. But yeah, I think just going back and especially with something that does have a lot of specific attributes to it, sonic possibilities like the vibraphone, like going back and just, and maybe this is where you're going to be in 5 years, where you'll finally there will be a book where like page 1 is working on just that the idea of like hitting a thing and then muting the note you just hit.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is such a weird uh, choreography to work out in your body.
Yeah.
And so like you could have a whole book that's just like, here's beautiful recital worthy pieces that are just like bing, boop, and you're like really just have plenty of time to just get that technique down. Yet it still is a piece that is a beautiful vibraphone solo that could, I challenge you, Brian, to do that, because the method book thing is great, but also, it's not written for the vibraphone.
Right.
And so in some respects, it's like Saint-Saëns is like, well, he didn't think about the vibraphone he was writing that.
Right.
So, and I say the same. I recommend the same things to steel drum students. Like, go get method books, clarinet method books. Just buy them for a nickel out of the used bin at the music shop. Read through them and give them right back to the music shop so they can resell them to somebody else. Like,
that's right.
And when you're done with that, you may not have learned the steel pan, but you will have learned how to get around the instrument in a way that now you can then start doing some extended technique or whatever. But, well, man, I don't know if we've solved any of the world's problems today or whether or not. But I will say, man, I really did learn a lot about the history of the vibraphone today, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm not a history buff and I'm not a historian, but I just love these little moments of context where, like, plugging something in to like a world war and realizing that this was happening amongst all of this other stuff, that there's something also right now that's being developed during a pandemic that in 100 years from now, somebody's going to be like, well, you know how that came about. 2022, there was a pandemic and people were locked inside and somebody wrote this code for this program. And were they not locked inside for 2 years? But, in 100 years, people are just going to be like, well, look at this awesome code. It's like, yeah, but it came out of this crazy time in our lives, and like you have to look at it that way. And so it was really helpful to have you walk through that. I'm going to check out the Lulu and the Mio and the O'Brien pieces too. So, man, Brian, again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being proactive and reaching out to me.
Thanks for opening up an invitation.
And my policy is my door is always open. If you ever you have another project or when you write that method book,
that's right.
You can come on here and hawk it for. We'll try to sell it to as many people as we can. But man, in the meantime, stay healthy, stay safe, and I will really look forward to chatting with you again soon in the future. But in the meantime, is there a place where folks can find out more about? You said the vibraphone project and the stuff that you're working on. Where can folks find that out?
Well, I guess that's the thing to hawk right now. So the vibraphone project, it is an official 501c3 organization that I founded. I think I started in 2018. I started getting people together for it. And so you can just go online. It's the vibraphoneproject.org. I don't know if it has a "the" or not. Maybe it might just be vibraphoneproject.org.
Okay.
But yeah, we've got information. We have an ongoing educational series on YouTube. We have we have some commissions. We actually are going to be premiering later this year from some commissions that we got funded through New Music USA.
Awesome.
We may be opening up an online performance contest soon. We had a call for scores last year. We all kinds of fun stuff, and we are still looking for interested volunteers to come in and join the party. As far as I know, it's the only nonprofit anywhere in the world dedicated to promoting and supporting the vibraphone, full stop. And if you play jazz, if you play classical, contemporary, whatever, if you're a performer, composer, researcher, instrument builder, fan, takes all kinds, and we want to build that community, and we're happy to have you.
Well, listen, man, somebody's got to fight for the vibraphone.
That's right.
And if it ain't going to be them, it's going to be you. So
right.
keep
the
doing
vibraphone
it.
Lorax. That's what I am.
Well, and also, man, your kids didn't make a single peep this whole time, so they did great.
We can thank my wife for that.
We'll tell her I said thanks. All right, man, Brian, stay healthy, and I'll look forward to chatting soon. All right, man?
All right, thank you very much. It was great talking to you.
Likewise. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. This podcast is brought to you by Liquid Drum, liquiddrum.com down in Waco, Texas. My good friend Todd Meehan runs an amazing percussion company down there. Great merch, great content. Check him out, liquiddrum.com. Also, Kyle Dunleavy, dunleavypans.com, DUNLEAVY pans.com. Kyle Dunleavy makes and builds all the steel drums that I perform and teach on, in so percussion, as well as at NYU and Princeton. He's an amazing tuner, builder, just a really nice guy, very dependable. Check him out. If you are interested at all in steel pan advocacy, want to learn more about the goings-on in Pan in Brooklyn, check out paninmotion.com. My good friend Kendall Williams, Jerry Guy, Trisha Guy, and Arisha John run an amazing organization called paninmotion.com. Check them out. And finally, Alejandre Mirage runs an amazing clothing apparel company in Brooklyn that is steel pan centric. You can check him out at mangochow, CHOW, clothing.com. I own a bunch of his shirts. They're amazing, very stylish, beautifully made. Check them out. mangochowclothing.com. Okay, hope you're well. Talk to you soon. Bye.